Well, hello. This week, we're talking about gender, and probably to a lesser degree about sexuality, as they enter into our view of our history and our literature. My talk on this will be a little more argumentative than most of the notes I give, and this is largely because, out of all the different lenses which pair with our themes, this is the one I regularly see consistent resistance to from my students. So I want to take a moment to show why we need to talk about gender and the way we treat it. In 1740, I know, kind of jumping back. In 1740, Samuel Richardson published the epistolary novel Pamela. It tells the story of a poor but honest young woman, Pamela Andrews, who receives the unwanted attention of her aristocratic, rich, and handsome master. Pamela holds out, maintaining her virtue until her pursuer caves and marries her. In the meantime, there are some few hundred pages of him coercing, threatening, manhandling, kidnapping, and bribing her, driving the girl to her wits, but not her virtue's end. 2 years later, while Pamela was still an amazingly successful must-read across the UK, Henry Fielding published a satirical riff on it called Joseph Andrews. The plot from Fielding is, in most essentials, exactly the same as it is in Richardson's novel, with the exception that Joseph is the poor but honest one who is being pursued by a lecherous, beautiful, and rich noblewoman who schemes to have him at all costs, while the young man is determined to preserve his purity. In a nutshell, the fact that we can still perceive by why one situation would be considered funny while the other, melodramatic though it is, borders on tragic, is all the proof I need to show that gender still matters for us very much as it did for Richardson, Fielding, and society nearly 300 years ago. The thing is, much as with our little venture into labor, class, and everything Marxist, talking about feminism can be a divisive thing. Make no mistake, it is feminism we're talking about. Feminist critics are the folks who brought gender to the party, and so much has been published under their banner, we have no choice but to defer to them as the experts. In my experience, I will regularly have students who will shy away from the subject despite the clear need to discuss the roles played in a narrative which depend on gender, and importantly, the audience's understanding of gender. Just think of every story you've ever heard which resolves in a couple marrying. Every one of those depends on the subtext of a social construct designed to reference gender and the legally recognized obligations which are specific to it. So, my point is, gender matters. I can take this in another direction. Consider the high fantasy we witnessed last year in the stilted culmination of Game of Thrones. Yeah, it really was just last year. I looked it up to make sure. I thought I must be mistaken. Everything devolves there to the struggles of two powerful women and the forces they control. And yet, dominion in the end is handed over to a man. So you have to look at that and say, does that matter? And my answer is going to be, mm-hmm. So in week 2, we read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Now, if you think carefully about all the male characters in that book, the ones who are closest to realization as actual characters are the most monstrous. Does it matter that female characters displace males in that book, filling the center stage? Does it matter that there are no comparably monstrous women in Morrison's book? So my answer is, I put it out there immediately. My answer is yes, it matters. And I'll go further. It matters whether a male author depicts such a thing in distinction to when a female author does. And it's nothing less than the practical truth. So my advice is embrace it. This week, we're going to be discussing gender depictions, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. We also have a one-of-a-kind special assignment for the class. You're asked to produce a teaching aid in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. You're to look at gender as in the primary sources you have selected to talk about in your milestone project. Needless to say, gender might not be what you had in mind when you picked them, but that doesn't mean you can't insert that view now as a little practice in playing with the text. I will have some guiding suggestions in my announcements about this project, but as usual, if you have questions, I'm hoping by now you know what to do about it and can just get them to me. All right? So, till next week, adios.